Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Here we talk about everything from witchy topics and the paranormal to spirituality, quantum physics, and so much more.
It's spooky season, so I've been itching to tell some spooky stories, particularly from New Orleans, since for some reason my mind has been on that city all month. Now, I've always wanted to visit New Orleans ever since I was a kid. I think my interest might have started when I first watched Interview with the Vampire, but over the years, as I learned more about the rich history of the people and the powerful energies of this land, my curiosity grew. And while I would have wanted nothing more than to visit this year for Halloween, I sadly can't. So instead, I've gathered some spooky and interesting true stories from people who had supernatural experiences with vampires in New Orleans. So strap in, like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get into some stories. This true vampire story comes from the subreddit r/vampires called Vampire Sightings. Under the post, a user named ConsciousSoft7014 shares this account. My grandfather on my father's side served as lieutenant commander aboard a British S class submarine during WW2, and he swore the captain was a vampire. It was something my parents joked about behind his back. I never spoke to my grandfather about it. He passed away before I was old enough or emboldened enough to ask, and he never raised the subject in my presence, but my dad knows all the stories. The captain never boarded or disembarked the sub during daylight hours. His skin was pale as a candle. He occasionally displayed supernatural strength and reflexes. He seemed to be able to read minds. No one ever saw him eat or drink anything, etc., etc., etc. All the corny, classic vampire indicators. Apparently, my grandpa and his fellow seamen were even able to link the captain to various naval base disappearances, too. But my dad doesn't remember the details of those stories. Anyway, no one took my grandfather seriously. But then, after he passed away in 1993, we were sifting through his belongings, and we came across a black and white photograph of him in what appears to be the mess aboard the sub. He is standing in a long and cramped room with some other men, and they're all smiling for the photo. One of the men, however, is not smiling. He is very tall, very gaunt, and he appears to be annoyed. When we found the photo, my dad said, "Ah, and here's Captain Dracula!" And we all laughed and resumed going through Grandpa's things. The next day, my dad walked into the kitchen looking as pale as a ghost. He'd been inspecting the old photos with a magnifying glass when he noticed that the captain was not appearing in a small mirror at the back of the mess. You can see the reflection of all the other men in the photo, but not the captain. He just isn't there.
Hello, TikTok. Fagger Freestyle here with another story time about the time I met a vampire. I tried to do this story the other day on live and it just did not work out. But anyway, I just decided to record a video. People have been asking me about the story, so here it goes. I'm a rideshare driver in New Orleans. So, of course, I encounter all types of people from all walks of life. This one particular ride was very interesting. Now, this was a couple of years ago when this occurred. And I'm going to tell you, for the most part, I remember what she said. I do not remember what she looked like. And there are some details that when the experience was over, like I had completely forgotten some things. But anyway, so I'm riding, pick up this passenger, and I remember our conversation. And the craziest thing is I can remember her voice. And even as I'm telling you this, I can hear her voice in my head. And I can even picture like this part of her face around her mouth her lips, I can see them moving as she's talking to me. And I remember her hand being on my shoulder, and I remember what it felt like when she touched me. But a lot of other stuff, it's like was just completely erased. So I pick her up, and I do know that we were having conversation. I talked to many of my passengers, and she is telling me I have really great energy. So I told her thank you. She asked me some things about myself, nothing too private, nothing with too many details. So, I just kind of gave her some general info. And I remember her telling me that she wasn't from here. That I do remember. And then she proceeds to tell me how much she loved New Orleans, how much she loved being there, living there, et cetera, et cetera. I do recall asking her where she was from originally, and all she told me was that she was from very far away. And it's funny again because I'm hearing her voice in my head as this is weird. Um and I've never shared this story with anybody, so TikTok, you're getting it first. um she touched my shoulder at one point, and this is where things got really strange. She touched my shoulder, and I felt like I just froze. And even as I'm talking to you right now, I can distinctly remember that feeling of feeling frozen. And my hands were on the wheel because I could see my hands on the wheel. The car wasn't moving. And being frozen in that moment, I hear her voice, but not like I'm here talking to you. In my head, I hear her voice telling me, don't be scared, that she's not going to harm me. And then after that, we're moving again. And I remember kind of turning and looking like that. And she was sitting back in the seat and her hands were on her lap. And I said, what did you do to me? And she just smiled. And she says, I just leached some of your energy. And I said, what? She said, I just leached some of your energy. She said, this is going to sound crazy, but I can assure you it's true. I'm a vampire. She said, but I'm not the type of vampire that you've been taught about in books and movies. She said, those types of vampires exist, but they're very rare these days. I'm a vampire that feeds off of energy. And all I have to do is touch you to get it. She said, New Orleans is a great place for her and her kind to exist. And that there are quite a few members of their tribe, is what she called them. I think I remember this part of our conversation so significantly because I believe when she touched me, she implanted something in my mind, whether you want to call it a memory or a thought or an idea. But she gave me something of herself, probably, to where I can recall this portion of the interaction between us. Maybe she knew that eventually I would share the story with others and therefore maybe make it a little bit more acceptable for them to start, for her and her members to start presenting themselves. I don't know. I don't know why she even chose me for this. But she told me that there are vampires that survive off of good energy. There are vampires that survive off of bad energy. There are vampires that survive off of sexual energy. And there are vampires that survive off of blood. And New Orleans is the only place in the world where you can find members of all four of those vampire tribes. Maybe she wanted me to remember this portion of it as a warning. I don't know. But I know she wasn't lying just because of how I felt. And even now, it's crazy because I still feel like her hand is on my shoulder, which makes me wonder, when she touched me, did she create some type of psychic connection between the two of us? I don't know, but I think I need to end this. Anyway, I don't remember where I dropped her off at. I don't even remember dropping her off. The next thing I remember doing clearly was being in a part of town that I didn't remember how I even got there. And it was like 2 hours later. And I was just in a parking lot. Just in a parking lot. And I know it sounds weird, y'all. I think I probably shouldn't even recorded this. I probably shouldn't even be talking. I probably should not even be talking about this. I shouldn't.
All right, you guys, this is my part 2 to my New Orleans trip, and we're going to talk about the vampires that I saw. So fast forward a bit into my trip, both of my friends got there, and we decided to go out and walk Bourbon Street and just see what the nightlife was like. We ended up at this bar that had live music, and it was a pretty big space. I don't remember what it was called. I wish I did. But when you walk in, there's like the bar on the side, and then this is what caught my eye at first. There was this table in the back right corner that a lot of people were sitting at, and they were sitting like on top of the table and on the actual like benches of the table. Their vibe was completely different than everyone else's in the room. It was just kind of, the only way that I can describe it, it was like a still darkness. It was just kind of off. But there were these two guys in particular that caught my attention. One was this tall black guy, right, that was sitting on one of the table, very tall. And this other guy who was like a shorter white guy, But they both looked very interesting. But I turned back towards the bar so that I can grab my drink and talk to my friend that was next to me. Tell me how, as soon as I turned around with my drink, he was standing there right in front of me. Like some Twilight shit. He started talking to my friend, asking where we're from, what we were doing. Now, one of my friend's boyfriends, who actually lives in New Orleans, was with us, by the way. But anyway, this vampire dude and his tall friend convinced my friends, not me, that we needed to go to this bar. I think it's one of the oldest bars that's in New Orleans. And they have this unlisted shot that you have to ask the bartender for that's not on the menu. And as we started walking, we noticed that we're getting further and further away from, Touristville. And by this time, I really wish that I could explain it, but the vibes were just so weird. They were so weird. And I told my friends pretty much that it was a really creepy vibe. Like, why do we need to go all the way out somewhere else just for a shot, you know? And on top of that, their energy was just not normal. And my friend's boyfriend agreed with me. And I specifically remember like typing out a text on my phone. And as we were walking, I showed it to my friend's boyfriend. And I straight up said, I think they're vampires. And he just looked at me like with the most serious look, like, I don't know why he didn't say anything out loud. Like, I guess maybe he didn't want to seem like the crazy one. But this is where shit started to get real. So there has to be a part 3 to this because there's no way I'm going to be able to fit it. So I'm going to post it right after this one. Part 3, my New Orleans trip, vampires, let's go. We got to this bar that they wanted us to go to so bad. He ordered those special shots for everyone. Myself and my friend's boyfriend just kind of looked at each other like, I'm not drinking this shit. I don't know what's in this. So like we barely sipped it and then just kind of like chucked the rest. And after that, the shorter guy, he started holding a conversation with one of my friends, and this conversation was drawn out. Like I'm talking about 25, 30 minutes. But the conversation was only about her. Like her life, what she's doing. Every time she tried to ask him something about his life, he deflected it. Or it was something like 2 words, like very brief, back to you. Meanwhile, his tall friend didn't say anything to anyone the entire time. He was just sitting there off to the corner, like just there, blank-faced. And I noticed as their conversation kept going, the more drained my friend started to get. And then I was like, A lot of times when people think about vampires, they think about blood-sucking vampires, like freaking Twilight or, you know, whatever other TV show or movie. Most of the time, and I'm not saying that it doesn't exist because I know that it does, but most of the time, these are energy vampires. And they literally suck the life out of you. And that's exactly what was happening to her. But they didn't want to hear me at that time. So after she started getting tired, all yawning and stuff, he tries to make his way over to me. And I had such a dominant energy when he came over to me because I'm like, you're not about to fuck with my energy. So I looked at him in the eyes the entire time. And every time he tried to ask me something, I reflected the question. I was like, what about you? And after about like 5 minutes, he knew that he wasn't gonna get anywhere with me. You can't play with me, I'm a witch. Fast forward, my friend started saying how she was tired. If we didn't do anything, she's just gonna go back and fall asleep. So when we left, they wanted to go to this 4-story like nightclub. But as we were walking there, I started telling them what I was feeling and what I knew, that they were freaking vampires. And then we decided to lose them when we got in there. Now, when I tell you guys, this place was packed like wall to wall, every floor. I think we went all the way up to the 3rd floor. I can 100% tell you that we lost them and that crowd of people because we were inside the building before they even got inside. So they wanted to go out on the balcony because they wanted to smoke or whatever. And I was sitting there telling them like, dude, like those guys were freaking vampires. That tiredness that you're feeling because they were draining your energy. Tell me how. 2 minutes later, I turn around and guess who's there? And this time it was almost with a smirk on his face. Like, oh, that's cute. You thought you lost me, didn't you? And somehow he knew what I was talking about before he even got there. He was like, so what were you saying to your friend? And proceeded to pick me up on the balcony. Okay, this is the final part to my vampire story. So when he put me on that balcony, y'all, I was shook. Like, and I look over to the corner where my friends were, and none of them were like looking over. I was like, how are you guys not seeing this right now? So what I did was I kind of pushed my leg down so that I would have had at least most of my body like close to the floor. Like that was the smoothest threat I had ever seen. But I did get down. I was definitely trying to play it off and keep things cool. But either way, shortly after that, we ended up leaving. And it's so crazy because even after all of that, he gave me his number. Like, I kid you not. And in my head, I was like, should I have a vampire friend? My sheer curiosity and just like, wow, like this is magical as fuck. But then I kind of got over it, you know, curiosity killed the cat. I don't need to be friends with a freaking vampire, and I deleted his number. But yes, you guys, so that happened.
All right. Everyone's talking about their vampire story, so I'm gonna tell mine. I don't really talk about it because people think I'm fucking crazy. And I am also someone who grew up, well, I wasn't raised in Louisiana, but I grew up in NOLA, hardcore. I have Cajun friends, Cajun family. I was a spicy dancer for a really long time and always went down to NOLA to, like, get an extra bag. And as a spicy dancer, I traveled all over the US. I danced in Las Vegas, NOLA, NYC, LA, anywhere that had a insane nightlife, like Miami, stuff like that. And I'm also a lover of places with a very rich history and rich nightlife. So NOLA was just, like, home for me, you know? Like, anyway, so one of these days that we decide to go and travel, I have a girl group that I traveled with, and it was myself, Fox, that's what the girls knew me as, Hennessy, Brooklyn, and Tia. And we buddy systemed. We never left without at least one other friend. If we went out, it was a group of all of us, you know, like going out to eat or whatever. We never went out by ourselves, alone. One night, we're in NOLA, and we decided that was where we wanted to go. And if you know New Orleans, you know that it has a very, very rich history of the occult and strange things happening that can't easily be explained. And I know from my childhood and the things that I've seen that everyone kind of just brushed under the rug and was like, no, you didn't. Vampires, witches, werewolves, mermaids, fairies. There's a reason why our ancestors were talking about them way before the Bible was even made. And I'm a firm believer that while they may not be what we've read, they exist. And what I'm about to tell you only confirmed to me that these things exist. We just don't know about it yet. Or maybe they don't want us to know. Anyway, our plan was to be there for 2 weeks. And the first, I want to say maybe 3 days, we had already hit our goal with money. So we decided we were going to take like a 2-day, we were going to actually enjoy our vacation. We weren't going to work. NOLA has quite a few alternative or goth bars, speakeasy, pubs. There's also a lot of hidden speakeasies and pubs in the underground or wherever. I currently live in Oklahoma City, same thing here. Anyway, so we're at this club, and I, for the life of me, really can't remember what this club was, but I do remember that we were being harassed by a particularly fedora-wearing dude. And he grabs our friend Tia by the arm, and, you know, we're immediately like, whoa, hold on, big boy. But this guy comes over, and he kind of just, like, puts himself in between them and kind of shoos the, and, like, he doesn't say anything to this guy. He just looks at him. And the guy shuts up, doesn't even, like, try to fight him or rebuttal or nothing. He just walks away. I didn't necessarily think it was a little weird at the time, you know, because I was like, well, obviously, like, that guy could have gotten his ass kicked by our savior over here, you know. But when I looked at our savior or whatever, our guy, our knight in shining armor for the day, he was so beautiful, it was unsettling. Like, do you get what I mean? Like, he didn't look real. He didn't look human. He was so pretty. He didn't look human. And humans don't look like that, man. Like, there was something about him when I was looking at him that just hit my uncanny valley. Like, he looks human, but that's not human. Like, you know the lady on the flight, that motherfucker back there is not real? That's how I felt. Now, granted, this was years ago, but, like, when that video went viral, I felt her, because I went through that shit. And I immediately was looking at my friends like, y'all see this shit too, right? Like, I'm not the only one. His eyes were they were a color of green that I had never seen before. Like, they were, like, it was like hypnotic. Like, when you looked in his eyes, it was like yeah, keep looking at me. Like, it was almost like you could hear his voice in your head, and it was weird. And I'm autistic, so I already don't like looking people in the eyes, but that dude made me fucking uncomfortable. Every time I looked in his eyes, I could hear his voice in the back of my head. So I'm over here shaking. I am tense. I do not want to be here. I want to leave. The look that this guy gave me when I was like, I'm ready to leave. Like, I thought it in my head, and then he looked at me. And I looked at him, and we shared a moment. And in the back of my head, I heard, no, you don't. And I straight up, like, if you've seen the video of the lady talking about how she gave a vampire a Lyft drive, and she felt like honey, like, drifting over her, like a sense of, like, everything's gonna be okay, kind of. Like, I'm not looking for you, kind of thing. That's what I felt, too. Like, just this weird, warm sensation just running down my, like, from the top of my head down to my feet. Just this weird, warm sensation of, like, stop freaking out. You're gonna make this harder on everybody if you don't stop freaking out. So, at this point, I calmed down because I've watched enough true crime docs to know that panicking's not gonna get anybody anywhere. I start devising a fucking plan, because in my mind, I'm not really thinking this dude's a vampire at this point. I'm really just thinking this motherfucker is going to kill us. Long story short, by the end of the night, he has convinced all four of us to go to this hidden speakeasy. Everyone else is fine with this. Like, oh yeah, let's go somewhere for people like us, is what this guy says. And all the girls are fucking down for it. They're ready to fucking go. They grab their purses. I'm like, we are going to get unalived. But we go. We go, and Tia goes missing at some point. We don't know where she's at. The guy that brought us here is also gone, and last we saw, he was with her. So already I'm freaking out. And I take a look around the room, and I notice that because I hadn't up until this point, because I was so focused on, like, trying to figure out how to get me and my girls out of this situation. I look around the room and I notice half of the people in here are human. The other half don't fucking look human. They don't look human. They look exactly like the motherfucker that brought us here. And now I'm starting to wonder, okay, we're in a fucking, like, coven of cryptids. I pull Brooklyn aside. I'm like, we need to get the fuck out of here. Like, I'm almost positive that we have walked into some supernatural shit that we are not ready to fucking deal with. Like, our mortal brains cannot comprehend this shit. She goes and finds Tia. She's making out with the guy that brought us here in the corner. And she decides that she's going to spend the night with him. We do our best to try to dissuade her from this. He convinces us, rather easily, might I add. He means no harm to her. He just wants to have a little fun. We're shitty friends because we let her do it. Because we felt convinced that he wasn't going to do anything to her. I didn't. Everyone else did. But she comes home the next day. She comes back to our apartment, our hotel room, whatever. Literally the next day, he gets her an Uber, brings, like, she's here, she's fine. This bitch is drained. Like, straight up, no color in her face. She sleeps for 2 whole ass days. Later, after we get home and stuff, she mentions that she might see him again, but she wasn't really sure that she liked it because he kept biting her. And then she slept for 2 days? Bro, that was a fucking vampire, and you can't convince me otherwise. You just can't. You just can't.
I'm seeing all these videos about vampires popping up on my TikTok For You page. And I never ever thought I would tell this story, at least in a public forum. But here goes. this is my vampire story. It still baffles my mind when I think that, say that, and I still get the creeps with the memory of any of this. And I'm going to be a little bit cryptic, if you get my drift, with regards to some of the experiences. But several decades ago, I had lost my job. I had just had my baby girl. So she's going to be 30 this year. So that's how long it's been. And I had gotten a job interview at a local business. Again, I'm not going to say what kind of business. And I went to this interview and I immediately felt something odd with the owner of this business. There was something so mesmerizing about him. He wasn't good looking, but he was good looking. It's hard to explain. Like, there was just something strange about him, and he just felt almost hypnotic. And he said, I'm interviewing for a couple more people, and I'll give you a call in a couple days and let you know if you get the job. Okay. I did get the job. A couple days later, he gave me a phone call and he said, I am offering you this job at this pay. And it wasn't bad. The hours weren't bad. The pay wasn't bad. And I said, let me think about it. I had another offer on the table. And he said, please let me know by tomorrow. And I'm like, understood. So I had called my mom, and my mom was very intuitive, even though she didn't really want to admit that she was. And I told her, and I'm like, I got this job offer, and I didn't even tell her a lot of like the creepiness that this guy kind of gave me. And she's like, Christy, I have a really bad feeling. Do not accept this job. Do not accept the job. I'm telling you right now, something's not right. Do not accept this job. Now, this is a business that was in the person's family for a long time. And so it wasn't anything out of, it wasn't like a starter company. This person was kind of known in the community. My mom didn't know him, but so it was a substantial, real job. And I'm like, Mom, I don't understand. I need a job. She's like, you're going to get a job offer from that other place that you interviewed for. Just stick it out. Tell this guy no and accept the other job once it comes. And I'm like, this job was actually, it was pretty good. But I took my mom's advice and I called the gentleman the next day and I said, I'm so sorry. I am really honored, but I'm declining the job offer. And thank you very much for your time. And he's like, I will double your pay. Excuse me, sir? I will double your pay. Now, it already was good pay, but double the pay was a lot of pay. And I'm like, again, something felt really off. And I'm like, sir, I'm so sorry. I'm going to decline. And he's like, I'm going to check with you in a couple days. And there was just something very ominous about the way that he said that. And that night, I ended up having a dream with him in it. And it was very vampire-ish, is the only way that I can describe it. And the business that he was in also spoke volumes for that. So a couple days later, he called me. And I said, again, sir, I've accepted another job. And I did not tell him with whom. And he's like, I will triple your salary. And I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. And he said, I can tell that you are very psychic. And I can tell that you know who I am and what I am. And I think it would behoove you to take this job. What? So I told him again, no, thank you. And he said, okay. Now this was like, internet wasn't really a thing. Like you couldn't really look people up. There was AOL chat and such like that, but you couldn't really look people up like you can now. And so I ended up accepting a job at a cabinet store and as an office manager. And I didn't hear from him, but I was still having these weird nightmares with him in it. And I'm like, it's just got to be in my head, right? But it was almost like he could read my mind. It was very strange. Well, guess who showed up at the kitchen store the second day that I started? Yeah, this guy. And it's like he knew that I was going to be there. He's like, "Hi, Christy." And I'm like, "Excuse me, what are you stalking me? Like, what are you doing here?" And he's like, "I'm ordering a new kitchen for the business." Like, it was nothing. And he continued to come in my dreams. About a year later, I ended up taking a job at a fireplace store as an office manager. A couple days into that, this gentleman walks in and says, "I need a new fireplace for my business." Excuse me? Now, I'm not going to say everything about the business and everything about him, but you might be able to figure it out with a clue. And that is, he lived above the business. That's all I'm going to say. So he's like, "Yep, I need a fireplace." And I'm like, "Sir, I don't understand why you're here." And he continued every time. He's like, "Would you like to work with me?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm good. I'm good." I worked at the fireplace store for a couple of years, and he would every once in a while call, and he would ask for the fireplace to be serviced. And I ended up telling my boss at the time, like, how I felt about him. And he would laugh, and he's like, "I'm going to send you out there with the tech." And I'm like, "No, you're not." But he was like, "Yeah, something's strange about this person. Something is almost like immortal. Even if you look at the family lineage, it's like he's existed before, and it wasn't like his great-great-grandfather. It was like him." So I ended up quitting a couple of years after that, and I worked for a school district. And guess who showed up at the admin office? Him. And in the meantime, he's still coming in my dreams. And every once in a while, he's still calling me and asking me if I want a job. And no. My mom had passed away. I'd gotten a divorce. I mean, we are eons into this. And I ended up running into him at a store, and he, like, do you remember everybody you interviewed like one time? Because he either has a really crazy memory, or it wasn't like a stalker. He just wasn't. That wasn't the case. It's just, again, it was very vampiristic. Is that a word? And so I ran into him, and he's like, "Hi, Christy." And again, he's like, "How are you doing?" And it was just very kind of Norman Bates creepy. I ended up in the job that I'm in now. I'm a professional psychic medium. I ended up having to go to a competitor of his to work on a case. And we ended up talking about this gentleman and his business. And I didn't say anything, but the owner of this establishment went, "Just, Christy, make sure you stay away from, because he's a vampire." And I didn't laugh, and she didn't laugh. And she knew I knew, and I knew she do too. So vampires do exist, and they don't necessarily wear capes. Sometimes they wear business suits, and sometimes they invade your dreams. And I feel as if there's a possibility that my life at that time was a little bit crazy, and it was because of the psychic sort of like vampire energy that he was sending to me, because he was mad that I did not accept a job with him. I would love to tell you more, but I don't want to open up that can of bats.